Please welcome Dr. Jonathan Woetzel and the following esteemed panelists: Cindy Allen, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Compliance with FedEx Logistics; Alan McCorkle, Senior Vice President of NYK Ports; and Dr. Chris Thornberg, founder of Beacon Economics, LLC.
Wow, LA. So one of the few things that wasn't said in that very kind introduction is that I am actually an LA native, Trojan pride, fight on. My round trip here to LA has been going on for about 5 years. I was 30 years in China before that. And so I sort of feel like I embody the spirit of World Trade Week, but no less than all of you do as well. So I'm here to give you a few just introductory remarks, and then we turn to the real experts, the people who are making this happen here in LA. But as we said, I got two broad sort of messages around how we see trade changing. And the first is, okay, does anybody know who won the trade war? Any guesses? Vietnam won the trade war. So yeah, this was already happening. We kind of saw the China, rethinking, reimagining its role in the world and trade, for a decade now. It's going from being really the producer to the consumer, and from a low tech to a high tech. So there's a huge shift going on in the geography of trade, and the political, in many ways, is kind of accelerating some of the economic. But what we see is that the rise of the rest. There is a whole wave of new trading nations and trading ports and trading clusters. And a lot of this trade is a little tricky to see because it's regional trade. Regional is what's taking over. We used to think it was all long haul. The region is going to be the center of trade growth, and that's reflecting the economics, the consumptions, the markets, but also the supply chain and the deepening of regional supply chain. So that's one big thing. And the other one is, of course, tech. We can't live without our tech. Tech changes everything, and tech changes trade. So trade is now a lot more tech-enabled. Trade is a lot more about the tech. Actually, we think that there's no more than 18% of global trade is from low to high wage. So 80% of trade is something to do with high wage countries trading with each other. It's a lot more about the value added. And the trade itself is a lot more value added. It's a highly intangible commodity sometimes trade. We just heard about the 3D printing. We heard about how that's going to change the services and the spare parts business. We're going to see a radical increase of transparency. The tech enables us to know not just who our supplier is, but who our supplier's supplier is and who their supplier is, all the way down to the first time you'll ever actually know where your suppliers are, where they come from, and what your risk is. How transparent is this will dictate whether or not you're going to be liable to be held up by some disruption, or maybe somebody is borrowing your stuff. So it helps to know that. I think the Department of Defense just did, I can say this publicly because I was on a panel with a guy yesterday. He said they just did a review of their supply chain. They found that when they went down to Tier 3, 50% of Tier 3 came from China. That was a surprise. And so, yeah, I think it really helps to know where your goods are coming from, and tech enables that. Tech is driving the growth. So those are kind of the two big ideas I want to leave you with. And now it's my real pleasure to sit down with the folks who are, again, driving it. We've got from the far right, there's Cindy from Memphis, but still, running. I think the amount that she travels between Alaska and LA makes her kind of an honorary Angelino. With an amazing global company, an amazing high-tech company. We've got Alan, and Alan leading, and he is definitely an honorary Angelino, 30 years here, formerly out of North Carolina, but leading the high-tech port and Yusen terminals there with the alternative maritime power and the on-rail transfer. I encourage you to pick up a brochure. It's really impressive, the level of technology that they've got. And of course, a man who really doesn't need an introduction. We've got Dr. Chris Thornberg from Beacon, the man with the crystal ball, and I say that advisedly. But he did demonstrate it under the subprime market forecast and was ahead of the trend there. And so really, we've got a great panel from all the different parts. So let me move over now and start. I'm just going to say, so Cindy, let's start off, from this technology world. what do you see changing? I mean, what is actually going on when we look at the trade that goes through FedEx's terminals every day?
Well, I think e-commerce, in one word. E-commerce is changing everything that we do. It's changing everything that our customers do. It's changing how they have to look at their supply chain overall. So I grew up in Indiana, Midwesterner through and through. Sorry, LA, I love visiting. But we used to go to catalog stores because not every Sears or JCPenney, big department stores weren't in existence in small rural areas. And we used to go to the department store, catalog store, and you'd pick through and order what you wanted, write down somebody'd call, the home office, and those goods would get shipped and you'd go pick them up. So everything that's old is new again. We just have that little computer in our pocket now or in our purse that allows us to do that automatically. So what used to take weeks now has to have a velocity, and that changes day by day by day. And as Dr. Lange mentioned in his speech, the fidget spinners is a great example of how quickly a market changes. And if you are that fidget spinner competitor, you have to realize that you're not only going to have to change more quickly and more rapidly, but you're also going to have to, even if you aren't in that market, you're going to be impacted by that. So you have to understand the analytics of the data that's out there. And I know for us, we have to adapt and be more quick and go back to the origin. So you mentioned, the understanding your suppliers. That's where the data starts. Shipment doesn't start when it gets on a boat. It doesn't start when somebody receives it. It starts in where it's manufactured, where that good is grown, where our food comes from. And we have to understand the origin information and have it travel along with the shipment today. Our founder is famous for saying that the data about the shipment is as important as the shipment. And I think we haven't moved away from that. We've merely evolved in the ability of our technology to meet that. And we have a couple of interesting proof of concepts that we're working on with some of the governments that really we hope to enable our customers to really meet those needs back at origin all the way through that shipment.
Cool. I want to come back to those proof of concepts and how you're working with governments on that. But let me move on to Alan now. You're running the port. You see it all every day. What's going through the port, and how is the port changing?
Well, we're one of the terminals in the port. We've obviously we're one of the mid-sized terminal operators in the Port of Los Angeles, and where we have anywhere from 4 to 6 ships a week calling our facility, and we're a consumer nation, so obviously we have a much higher percentage of imports coming into Southern California, into our country, than we do on the export side. But import, obviously, is everything that you're going to, when you walk out of this breakfast this morning, head out into the local markets here, local stores, everything that you're going to see there, most of what you're going to see there has probably been imported into California, into our country from foreign countries, part of foreign trade. Exporting, the export market is not as strong, especially as it relates to China, but the export market is built around really two different major commodities. One is what we would call the recyclables, or the low value cargo, and then the other side would be the high value cargo. Low value would be things like scrap paper, what we technically call waste paper, recyclables that are sending overseas to use. Secondly, you would get into agricultural products, machinery, things of that nature that are being exported out by a multitude of companies, especially here in Southern California, Northern California.
And how competitive is the port these days? What's going on in the terminal specifically, and how does that help help shippers?
Well, I think that, first thing, if you head down south on the 110 freeway, you get into the San Pedro Port Complex, the ports of LA, Long Beach, it is the most robust port complex in North America. When you look at the terminal infrastructure that we have in Southern California, and more importantly, you look at what's outside that terminal infrastructure, when you look at the freeways, the warehouses, the rail network, is that Southern California has something to offer that most other locations don't, which is just this robust network that can handle large ships, because the market's moving to larger ships. Some of the larger ships that are in the business are starting to come to Southern California, and our ability to handle those ships, discharge those ships, load them effectively, timely, get them back on the water, and then more importantly, get that cargo off the marine terminal into its place of destination. Whether that be a deconsolidation center in the Inland Empire, whether that be to the customer's warehouse, directly to their store. So the ability that we have to handle the larger ships and get the cargo moved expeditiously to really its final destination is really the key in this market in North America. You have other terminals, ports in East Coast Gulf part of the country that might not have that same network that can move the volume of cargo that we move through the ports here in San Pedro Bay ports.
So that's a pretty awesome setup. And I want to come back and sort of talk about how you see that changing. Sort of what are some of the challenges, but also some of the hopefully the changes that you're going to make and to even make that much more efficient. But first, Chris. So where are we at, Chris? It's been a rough 2018. It seems like.
Yeah.
Things have been going up.
Well, I would say that rumors of this expansion's demise are highly over-exaggerated. We have been hearing a lot of negative news, of course, about the U.S. economy and global trade and everything else. But when you take a step back and actually look at the numbers, guess what? 2018 was a record year for exports. It was an enormous surge. Yes, there was some fluctuation. We know about some of the trade issues going on at this particular point in time. From my perspective, we have a revised NAFTA agreement. That, of course, is incredibly important. You think of Canada and Mexico, two of our most important trading partners. It's nice to see that agreement firming up, and of course, that's very good for trade here in the state, here in the city. And of course, equivalently, a lot of the issues with the European Union that popped up a year ago have also faded, and there's even conversations about getting going again on some sort of Atlantic trade pact. So things are stable, far more stable than I think a lot of the rhetoric would have you believe. And candidly, we have to remember this is all occurring in the context of a relatively strong dollar. Yep. So it goes back to the idea that the U.S., that here in Southern California, we are still an incredibly important cog in this global trade chain, and that's going to continue to push this economy forward over the course of the next few years.
So a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing? Or?
Yeah, well, we see a lot of that, right? Whether it's, of course, national or here locally, yeah, there's often what I would call too many miserablists out there who seem to be eager almost to see the end of current economic expansion. Again, I think nothing is farther from the truth, and of course here in Southern California, we're reaping the benefits of that. California has some of the greatest wage growth in the nation right here, right now. Unemployment in Los Angeles County has never been lower. I mean, these are exciting times for us. And in so many ways, we know trade is part of that conversation. And yes, it's the physical stuff that comes through the ports, but trade's different now. You go way back in time, that Los Angeles is here because of the ports, right? It was dredging those ports that got the railway here, that moved the nexus of Southern California growth away from those folks, what are they called? San Diego? Yeah, those guys. Up here. And then it's that port that turned this into a manufacturing sector. And then all changed in 1990 with big changes there. And where are we today? Again, these ports are still the center of what we do. And I mean LAX and LA and Long Beach and all that. But again, how LA relates to trade is so different now than it was in 1990, so different than it was back in 1920. Yeah. So for me, it's an amazing economic story.
Well, I want to come back because I really want to hear more about how that change has happened and so how you see the differences. But now let's go back to Cindy. Now, I think as we heard, so okay, it's good. we're in position. We've got the network, and it is all about the commerce. It's all about the tech, specifically the e-commerce. So how is that going to work out over the next couple of years? You're in compliance, and so you're working with governments each and every day. Our government, all the governments, to help enable this. So I think shippers want to know. So what's coming down? And so what are these proof of concepts that you're mentioning? What should they expect? And what are you working on to enable that e-commerce to happen?
Well, I think, I live and breathe in the regulatory world every day, and FedEx participates in many government bodies and partnerships. World Trade Organization, we are a contributor to the e-commerce framework. So from a shipment perspective, the data that you file in one country should really be the same as what you file in another country, because the threat doesn't really change with the country. It really is centered on the goods. So we contribute to helping governments understand that standardization across the globe is a good thing when it comes to data. that allows them to consume it a little bit more effectively and analyze it, as well as it allows our customers to really provide it in a more standardized way so that it can be consumed. Then on the U.S. level, we are participating, and I've been here for about a week now, dealing with CBP and U.S. trade reps and some of the local CBP offices as well as headquarters on an e-commerce task force. And what really I think is amazing is as we all started buying online and we were driving the market to go to a business to consumer or even a consumer to consumer model, customs really wasn't anticipating that. So they were caught a little off guard in how they were positioned. They were really structured and continue to be on a box basis, container basis. They know how to do that. They know how to move trade effectively through that. But when they open that ocean container and there's 40,000 individual packages, they don't know how to act in that manner. So it's a challenge for them. So to their credit, they reached out to the trade and said, help us understand this. Help us devise how we can segment risk. And you guys that are playing, very compliant space, we want to identify you and move your goods through so we don't clog up the port, so we don't clog up all of the other freight that's attached to that, and really focus on those that we have a high concern for. So we participate in that space. And as well, from the technology perspective, we're big on blockchain. We believe that that's going to revolutionize. There is no other type of technology that really gets us to origin and tracks that shipment all the way through. So when you think about today, you may not know about that shipment until it gets on the boat. But it originated much earlier than that. So what is the technology that can really support taking that data in incrementally and building a shipment? Because it doesn't just start when it gets on the conveyance. It starts at origin. So that blockchain technology, we believe, is going to revolutionize not only the supply chain, but how we interact with governments around the world and how we're giving them data and how that's available to them to make earlier risk determinations so that they can segment that. Can you imagine a boat that comes in and, the top tier is they've all been cleared, they can go direct to the consumer, direct to the conveyance, and the freight that's on the bottom is what they're going to have to really segment and examine a little bit more. It allows for planning all the way through the supply chain. But that originates with your suppliers. You have to know. And the other thing I will say is enforcement. As you see in the news, we hear it all the time in the trade space. There's grave concern about what's coming into this country and protecting IPR rights. Intellectual property is extremely valuable to our country and to our companies that hold those IPR rights. And it's really important for them to be able to know what's coming in and be able to say, that's my product, I produce that, that's in my supply chain, and this is not. We think that blockchain and a few other technologies that could layer on that will make that available, not just to the government, but also to the individuals who have an interest in that shipment and to the shipping companies. So we see this as a very transformational technology.
So you see a day coming where every shipment that goes through FedEx can be essentially scanned for its intellectual property assurance, its place of its origins, and whether that's actually it's paid its royalties and licenses, and whether it's and whether it's dangerous, or each and everything.
Yes, I do. I think that you'll have the ability to tag a shipment. So today, all we know is we have a shipment. Here's a commercial invoice. Customs looks at that and they take in multiple data points. So I worked for Customs for 3 years. I ran their technology area from the business office. And the gathering of the data is so critical. And I remember sitting in a conference room with the Commissioner of Customs, and on one side were all the guys with the guns and the badges, and the blue shirts that you see when you cross the border and the ports. And on the other side were all the trade people. And the Commissioner said, what does our agency do? And some of the trade folks, we facilitate trade, we, support the economy, we protect goods, and the officers all said, we're the largest law enforcement in the United States, we, protect the safety of the American, and the Commissioner said, we are data gatherers. And there was a big gasp in the room, because no one was thinking in that. And he said, think about every decision that we make from an enforcement perspective on the trade side, and every decision that an officer makes when they're pulling up the records from the passports or pulling up the records from the shipment. That's data that's supporting the action that you're going to take. And I think that was a key turning point for the government to understand that they had the big data and they could do effective analysis. And I think they've gotten really good at it over the past 10 years. So we in the trade need to match that capability. Some of us are on that way, but also government is reaching out saying, we want to get down to that next level. We want to know, hey, I produce this, here's my license, and that information travels on a data chain, on that blockchain, and comes with the shipment. So when customs sees it, to them, this is a shipment, I know about it, I know the data, I know everything about this, I know everyone who is actually part of this transaction, either visibly or behind it, and I can let that go. And we think that's going to be revolutionary in our world, definitely from the hub perspective, but also, in every other mode of transportation.
Gives radical transparency a whole new meaning.
Yes, it does.
So that's, okay. I think there are going to be some really interesting questions about the data gathering process and sort of protocols and privacy. But let's move on the government theme, though, Alan. I mean, the port, of course, I think it's great. You described an integrated setup that's kind of premier incumbency assets that are all really integrated. California has a certain reputation for environmental regulations kind of getting in the way of things, but also or protecting the environment. And of course, now the marine industry is going through its own wave of regulation as we see sulfur and more expensive fuels coming to marine, low sulfur fuels. So how is all that playing out for the port and to the terminals? I mean, do you think that this is going to have a drag on trade? Is it going to be? Is it going to pull things back, or can we meet this challenge and sort of manage these coexistence, if you will, with the regulations? Or in fact, are we pushing for better regulations? So.
Well, great. This is a big one. You start talking about the regulations. Hits right at the environmental aspect of things, which California, no doubt, is a leader in clean air initiatives and how to improve the environment. The impact that's happened in our industry has been substantial, and there's a couple different angles to hit at this thing. One is that, as a terminal operator in Southern California, there's a mandate that we've got to have zero emissions to run our facilities, by 2030, and that's 11 years away. So that's coming quickly, as we know that time passes by as it does. So the fact that there's a mandate to do this, a couple of challenges with it. One is the equipment there to actually run a zero emissions facility, which in some cases there is, in some cases there might not be, depending on how you're looking to run your operation. The second aspect of it is the cost. And the PMSA, one of the shipping associations, did a study a couple years ago, and they came up with a figure somewhere south of about $28 billion would be the cost to get all your marine terminals, shipping terminals in the state of California, zero emissions with automation. There's a lot of debate right now about how to achieve zero emissions. Does it require automation? Does it not? And that. But let's just go down the path of zero emissions with automation, a $28 billion price tag, somewhere in there for all the California ports. Where does that money come from? At the end of the day, as we get closer over these next 11 years to that implementation, there'll be a lot of discussions about who's going to pay for that. Obviously, on the front end, as a terminal operator, we would have to go pay for that, but for some companies, that would put them out of business. So is there an impact to the business? There is an impact to the business, because for some, they might not be able, it won't be their problem because they're going to be out of business. For those that do, where's the money go? It's going to flow down. Typically, it'll flow to the consumer who wants to buy product. Another aspect of this is on the shipping line side, which is with the low sulfur fuel. And just for the information, the IMO has mandated low sulfur fuel to be run on all the ships, effective January 1st of 2020. And the price tag that's been associated with that, now this is not a California thing, it's where we shift gears, and we talk about an international standard, is somewhere between $10 to $15 billion. So on a $10 to $15 billion, again, whether we're talking about the automation of facilities or low sulfur fuel, all good initiatives to clean the air. What people need to understand, there's a price tag associated with that. And as a steamship line has to take on that cost, it seems from what we're hearing right now is that those costs we pass to the shipper, or what we call the beneficial cargo owner, or BCO, who will take that cost on. And typically what they'll do, they'll pass that on to, again, to all of us in this room, the consumer. So I think that that's going to be the challenge for us is whether if it's California, which is ahead of everyone else on the environmental initiatives, and understanding that there's a cost associated with that, where's that cost going to go? And depending on how the cost is handled, it could drive cargo away from Southern California to East Coast Gulf markets. And just a quick stat, if we go back to 2006, there's been about a 15, of the cargo that comes into the U.S. from Asia, California's lost about 15% of that market share since 2006, where the East Coast has picked up about 11%, Gulf ports have picked up about the balance of that, about another 4%. And that's a multitude of issues from cost to regulations to things of that nature. So I think as California that has this robust network, we're a major part of every global supply chain for any company. If you go to their corporate offices, they're talking about Southern California. They're doing business through Southern California. So I think the thing to take away is that we're always going to be a player in that market. We might not be as big as a player as we once were, looking back at the 2006 numbers to present time. We might not be as big of a player, but we have to be sensitive to the fact that whether it's a California initiative or a regulation or a federal regulation, how's that going to impact us? Especially in Southern California, where Canada has shown an effectiveness to grow market share into the U.S. market, especially Chicago and Mexico also.
It's a competitive world out there. So,
very competitive.
Yeah, but okay, so I hear you saying, okay, there's no free lunch here. If we want to meet these standards, we're going to have to pay for them, and someone's going to have to pay for them. But is this going to be the start of you said like the IMO, that's a global thing, right? And then the ports here, that may be more local, but do you think it will become global? And is there any way, like it says, California is the future today, and so like we are the future we're dealing with, does that give us any benefit going forward? Should shippers basically be saying, well, hey, this is actually going to go everywhere, and so we should be investing now to be around tomorrow? Yeah,
that's a great point. I do think California is the future, right? I mean, and that has been shown time and time again in different industries, and what you're starting to see, but there's a long lead time. There's a lag between the progressiveness of California and when the rest of the country or the rest of the world follows. The Clean Truck program that the Southern California championed, great program. That was 10 plus years ago, is just now starting to hit some of your East Coast Gulf ports for those that it's hitting. Some it's not even on it's not even on the map. So I think that eventually it will get there, because I think that's just the way the world's going. I think it just takes time, and sometimes when you lead it, you're a trendsetter, which is good. You're doing good things for the environment, for the community, which is good. But you might take a little bit of a hit along the way, being the first one out of the box doing it.
Yeah.
But I think it will come. But there's a lag time there, and that lag time can benefit other locations that aren't doing it.
Yeah, I mean the pioneers are the ones with the arrows in the back.
Yeah,
exactly. And the other one is John Maynard Keynes. In the long run, we're all dead. So
first over the hill gets shot. Yeah.
Let's get through the short term. So, but that pushes back to Chris. So you've heard there's some big upsides, and I think there's some big changes, but there are also some costs associated. We started talking about how trade affects the LA economy in a different way right now. So
a completely different way. And I think the best metaphor is almost think about movies, right? I mean, when you think about movie or TV production years ago, you think about a stage with a ton of different workers and everything going on. You walk into a modern soundstage today, and there is nobody there except for the actor or whatever. Yet we have as more people in the industry today than ever before. Where the jobs are moving from the soundstage into the office building. It's about the creative talent, it's about the technology, it's about the whole new wave of things. Trade's going the same way. Trade used to be giant cargoes of bulk, and you would break it down and distribute, break it down, distribute, break it down, distribute. And now the box is being basically put together in China for the consumer and going straight to the person's mailbox. And there's a huge amount of efficiencies there, but it also means fewer and fewer people, if you will, in the intermediate phase. Trade is still hugely important for LA, but the jobs are moving to the office. And LA's role in trade is shifting towards being a center of people and communication and technology wrapped around trade. And that's one of the most exciting parts about LA. LA is becoming the global city that it has needed to be. I mean, it's had a tough time, but it's now coming out of the gates, one of the most exciting places in the country, this mega region we're in. And from my perspective, the city has, if you will, this enormous, the county has this enormous opportunity, but part of this has to be rolling with the technological change, understanding the new wave of jobs are different in terms of their needs from an infrastructure capacity, and in so many ways. For example, the enormous upgrade of LAX as a global hub, that's important for trade. Because when you think of the office-to-office communications, these people are coming and going all the time. And making this city what it is right now, when it's becoming every day, is part of actually improving the trade flows. So it's so important for the county to embrace that and embrace the changes that are going on. It's a very exciting time. It's an enormous transitionary period. And I think we're very lucky to be here.
Well, let's go to there. So what should the county be doing to embrace the trade?
Well, one of them is getting into the occupations, understanding which occupations are growing, which ones are not. Most importantly is not standing in the way of change, rather being part of it, understanding that change is the constant, and you have to embrace it, find out where things are going, and help the industry as it progresses through. Look, the shift to clean efforts, whatever the case may be, is at the ports, is a critical component of this conversation. We can become a leader in that technology, in those efforts that, by the way, eventually is going to, again, put us on the map as the place to go to learn how to do this kind of stuff. Right now, you think about the Inland Empire, which is where so much of this stuff goes now, they are in the center of an enormous wave of changes in how stuff is distributed, how it's processed within these factories. We have these warehouses that have fewer and fewer people in them and more computers. But again, that means a whole different type of worker. And of course, training is what the city, the county, what the state is essentially involved in. So it's being there to make sure you're providing, if you will, the underpinnings of the change, the technological, if you will, training that's necessary to facilitate this. Because again, the trade industry you're going to see in 15 years is just as dramatically as what we saw 15 years ago.
Yeah. So I hear your focus on the occupations, particularly on education, and we heard some good news. We had our great scholarship recipients today, and we heard some good news about LA Community Colleges as well. So we also got some members of LA County government here. So if you had one thing to suggest to them on the occupational side, what would it be?
Well, I know the county's already getting involved in some stuff. My company has been fortunate enough to do some work, say, for example, in the digital media sector. My point is actually the same sort of thing, thinking about trade as an industry like the entertainment. And how do we go in? How do we figure out what those changes are, figure out what the county needs to do from a policy standpoint? And I think, again, I already think there is that momentum to be there. So in many ways, the answer is just keep doing it.
Yeah, great. Well, because it's an interesting view, because trade is more than, trade doesn't usually show up in the SIC codes. I mean, it's something
right, not in a traditional sense, right. You see it in transport, you see it in wholesale, but it's also in the professional services in terms of the design. And yes, manufacturing, while it has changed substantially, is still an important component to the Los Angeles economy. And there, yet again, what they are doing, how they are doing it has shifted completely. So again, it's such a vital source of what's going on around here, but we have to accept the changes that are going on and work with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, the appointment of the ambassador, the first deputy mayor for trade, and the presence of the supervisors is evidence that, LA gets it, and so it's about continuing to do that. So I'm going to, as we kind of think about where we go from here, I mean, we've had this big theme, I think, of, first of all, okay, trade is different, and so the technology is enabling it. And trade is different in terms of maybe also the physical trade itself, and then also this public-private interaction. I mean, that this seems to be going in a different way. You described that meeting very vividly, Cindy, about, we're all data gatherers here. How does that work out with the public? Yeah, so you had the business guys, you had the government guys. What about the rest of us? So how does the public get involved in all of this conversation?
Well, I think that to build on your theme of it's about the changing jobs and the changing skill sets that you need. 30 years ago when I got into the industry, I was typing entry documents to be delivered to the steamship so they deliver our cargo, hand calculating duty amounts and determining value. And I haven't done that for 15 years, at least, maybe a little more. But that's because technology has changed our job. No one does that anymore. Technology does that for us. So the skill sets that we needed 30 years ago, are different than what we needed 15 years ago, and definitely what we need today, and are going to be different in 5 years. So it's really important that we partner with higher learning and really offer these the next generation the opportunity to get into logistics and help them understand it's not about loading the trucks anymore. It's about taking that data in, analyzing it, understanding it, and giving it value to your customers. We need to understand that. And I think that from the public perspective, when you have a shipment, you're filing data anyway. It's a requirement to come into the United States. It's a requirement to export out of the United States that you're filing information. It's a manner that you're filing it that's going to change. You may lose control of that as the U.S. company. It's going to move overseas to the origin. And I like to think of, the quality processes that we used to have in the United States. Goods would come in, you'd have someone check, yeah, it has my logo, it's fine, check, put that quality check on and ship it out. That's not happening today because it's coming direct from the manufacturer into your mailbox. So who does that quality checking? Is there an opportunity there? That opportunity to physically check the goods is overseas. So we have to know that from the U.S. and understand how that changes our contracts, how that changes how we're going to analyze data. We need those suppliers to provide us with data. I need somebody who can analyze that data. So it really is a shift to the office, but also the office, the skill sets that they have. And I think from the public-private partnership perspective, we have to partner. No one wants bad toothpaste. No one wants to, feed our pet food adulterated dog food. We don't want that. So I think that companies are understanding that partnering with government agencies, for the public good is a good thing. And I think that, California has done massive amounts of investment in this and brought the rest of the country along. And I think as a consumer, as a private consumer, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the efforts. And I think, specifically from the West Coast, so much of trade happens here, even on the government side. They recognize, 40, 50% of all goods that come in through a West Coast port, if not a little more. And they know that, so they use the West Coast and specifically LA and Long Beach as their, as their test market. So this is the government test market because they know if it works here, it's going to work everywhere else. They're going to work out the bugs here. So you'll see enforcement actions, you'll see partnerships, you'll see that government reaching out a little bit more in an area like this because they know they need to make it work. Because when it doesn't work, then we have port issues, we have economic issues. It affects everyone in the area. So I think there's an awareness of that. And LA specifically is in a great place to really work as the public with the government.
So we're really rewriting that Frank Sinatra song, right?
Yes.
You can make it in LA, you can make it anyway. So that
little change.
Yeah, a little bit of change there, but that's great. So I'll come back to offline because when I go to Abu Dhabi, I always see the U.S. Customs guys sitting in Abu Dhabi. So it'd be really cool. So you're going to see that everywhere.
Yes,
see
you are
globally. So pretty cool. So how are we going to fix it? So we got this gap. We got this financial gap. So you're getting hit. The consumer is going to get hit. Any thoughts for how we recognize that environmental externality, as the economists might call it? And what do we do to get through the impacts? Because nobody wants to make the environment the cause of the economic downturn. This is supposed to be something that goes together.
Yeah, I think that business is resilient, right? And I think that we as consumers are resilient, and I think that the environment, without a doubt, is the way to go. What the ports of LA, Long Beach have done in setting the tone for our country, really setting the tone for the world. Going back to the first Clean Air Action Plan, now they're going into version 2 of the Clean Air Action Plan, which we was talking about zero emissions. That's going to impact marine terminals and over-the-road trucks, things of that nature. It's the right way to go. So I think that I think it's just that understanding there's going to be additional costs there, and understanding how those costs will be handled. And again, back to this resiliency thing, is that you know, whether you're going to add 12 cents a gallon to the, you know, to a gallon of gas in California, which seems to be okay with everyone, you know, as it goes through the legislative process. You know, it doesn't get appealed. First it gets approved, then it doesn't get appealed. So, you know, you go add 12 cents a gallon to gas, seems to be fine with everyone. So if the cost of transporting a box, if this is going to add, you know, 20% or 10% onto the cost of moving a box, that's got a rate of between $1,500 and $2,500, you know, to move from Asia to the U.S. Okay, then people will pay it. And if that trickles down to the consumer, that's going to, you know, that it's going to add 50 cents to, you know, it's going to add 50 cents to your iPad or your iPhone 15 when it comes out. Okay, people are going to pay it. So I think that we're conditioned to do that as consumers, and I think the industry itself is resilient because it's going to move forward, and it should move forward. It's just a matter of understanding that it's going to cost, and that's where it goes.
Yeah, I would just say to that, look, it's not the regulation, it's regulatory uncertainty. What policymakers need to do is be clear about the direction they're going, give proper benchmarks, and make sure the businesses understand. If you understand it, you can deal with it. So the most important thing is just being consistent and transparent.
Consistency and transparency. You get the last word, Chris. Congratulations. Thanks to the panel. Appreciate it.